Hey friends, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today we're exploring the colorverse with OPI's new 12-piece spring collection called Me, Myself, and OPI. So we've seen a couple of brands coming out with these cyberverse themed collections centered around technology, crypto, NFTs, which is exactly what I think of when I think of spring, but I'll save my thoughts for the end of the video like always. Let's just get into the swatches. First up, we have the Nature Strong Botanical Base Coat, which has this really cute green tint to it, but it dries down completely clear. I know my nails are stained, so it's kind of hard to tell, but yeah, I don't think this base coat would do anything really to prevent any further staining, but this is what I'll be using under all of my swatches today. I did get a couple of the new Nature Strong spring shades, so we're going to start with this gorgeous pink called A Kick in the Bud, and it's described as an electric pink cream. So it's definitely picking up pretty bright on camera, especially compared to the website photos, but I honestly think it's somewhere in between a bright but also slightly dusty kind of shade, if that makes sense. The formula on this one was more on the crully side, so you could still see through to your nail line on the first coat. It's not really a fully opaque cream like we've seen from OPI before. So I think most people can get away with 2 coats. For example, this is where I stopped at. Even though you still could see through to my nail line a little bit, I don't think it was enough to do a 3rd coat. So yeah, obviously I love this one. Next up, we have Eco for It, which is a blue vegan glitter nail polish. Not exactly helpful, but I would say this one has a very fine blue micro glitter and then a tiny silver metallic glitter all in a clear base. So here it is layered in 1 coat over A Kick in the Bud, and it's okay. I don't really think I like this combination. Maybe it would look a lot cooler over a darker color to see that electric blue kind of pop more. But yeah, I'm going to be showing it built up on its own in 3 coats as well. So since it's in a clear base, you can definitely wear this as a topper in 1 coat, but it's not super sparse like other larger glitter toppers usually are. I think on 3 coats, it is kind of cool. Like, it has an icy and wintry feel to it because of the silver and blue, but I'm just not really a fan of this one too much. And the last new Nature Strong shade that I have is Mindful of Glitter, which is basically the gold version of the last polish, but it has a pink shimmer instead of blue. So I actually didn't think I would like this one just from seeing it in the bottle, but I did like it once I layered it over A Kick in the Bud. I think the combination of the gold against the pink is a lot more flattering and something like I would wear. And the pink shimmer is still noticeable, but it's not as obvious as the blue in the last polish, so it's a little more subtle. I did build this one up on its own as well in 3 coats, and like the last polish, it was pretty much opaque. There were a few bald spots here and there, and I ultimately didn't love it. I think it's just the clear base over my stained nails that I'm not really a fan of. So I do think these polishes would work best as a topper or just look more flattering that way. It would also probably work really nicely as a glitter gradient or something. I find myself not really a fan of OPI's glitters. Their cream formulas, obviously they nail to a T, but when it comes to these other formulas, they just aren't quite there. So I would personally pass on these 2, but I'm definitely curious to know what you think of these new glitters. Now moving on to the main spring collection, for whatever reason, they've been sending me the Infinite Shine formula, but these are available in their regular line as well. But the first shade is Blinded by the Ringlight, which is described as a pastel yellow cream polish. The formula on this one was okay, kind of what you would expect for a pastel yellow, especially from a mainstream brand. It was a bit streaky on the first coat, but it didn't look that bad on 2 coats, even on my longer nails. I really found that these self-leveled really nicely, but I could see some people needing 3 coats, especially if you prefer much thinner coats. This one is actually one of my favorites from this collection. I just love how soft it is. It almost has this like buttercream feel to the color. And yeah, I just love pastel yellows, especially for spring. Next, we have Switch to Portrait Mode, which is described as a powder pink pearl. So I know pearl shades aren't exactly popular. I mean, I don't love them either, but I think that sometimes they can work. They are incredibly sheer though, so I think they could look nice in one coat if you have it layered over a sheer base, or if you just have shorter nails. I don't love how it looks on my longer stained nails exactly, but I could see the potential for this shade. So I did end up building this one up in 3 coats, and it still wasn't fully opaque. I find that these shades never really are unless you do 4 or 5 coats, but that's just so unnecessary. But it does have this really enchanting and angelic look to it that I didn't mind so much. Maybe it's also just the powder pink color that I'm a fan of, so you'll have to let me know what you think of these kind of pearly shades because we have a few others coming up. The next shade is Spring Break the Internet, which is described as a shimmery hot pink. So the shimmer is mainly pink, but I see flecks of blue in there too. This one has more of a jelly formula, so it is very squishy looking on the first coat and it doesn't cover up your nail line. I wouldn't exactly call this a jelly polish, but it almost wants to be. So I think if you do have shorter nails, you could get away with 2 coats, especially if you prefer that more squishy kind of look. And since you know I'm such a fan of these pink kind of jelly formulas, I decided to leave it as 2 coats because it was mainly opaque. You could still see through to my nail line a little bit, but I just didn't think it was necessary to get this to be fully opaque for me, but you probably would get it 100% opaque in 1 more coat. So yeah, I really love this one. It's probably one of my top favorites, but I don't know if it makes my top 5. Next up, we have Silicon Valley Girl, which is a tangerine orange cream. So this is another shade that I immediately liked, but I just thought it was a touch too bright for spring. Like it almost wants to be a summer color to me, but maybe that's just me. This one had a classic OPI cream formula where it was easy to apply and really even coverage on the first coat, but I still did do 2 for full opacity. I still go back and forth on whether this one is towards the top of my favorites. Generally, compared to the rest of the collection, it is, but at the same time, it kind of reads like a bright pumpkin-y orange sometimes, so maybe I'm just not a fan of how bright this is for the springtime. The next polish is Pink in Bio, which is described as a light pink cream. So this is one of those shades that's very white-based, but the formula was actually really nice to work with and not chalky at all like other white-based polishes can be. But since this is such a light shade, it can be a little difficult to get it fully opaque since I didn't find it to self-level as nicely as some of the other ones. So here on 2 coats, you can see that I do have some streaks towards the bottom and left side of my nail that didn't totally even out. And they kind of were still there on the 3rd coat, but I think that mainly this is a 2 to 3 coater for most people, depending on your application. And while I never show this in my swatch videos, I did wear this again in a Skittle that I posted on my Instagram. So once I did apply top coat, it really smoothed it out and it looked fine in 2 coats as well. So it's just kind of one of those weird shades, you know, depending on the day, you might need an extra coat, but I think this color is super cute. Next, we have NFTease Me, a turquoise cream polish. I kind of hate the concept of NFTs, so I'm really sorry if you think they're cool, but as far as the polish is concerned, it's actually a really, really nice shade. It's a lot more on the creamy side, so I had great coverage on the first coat, as you can see here, but it definitely wouldn't really be a one coater even if your nails were shorter. It builds up really nicely in two and was perfectly opaque, so yeah, as far as the color and the formula go, this is definitely in my top 5 favorites from this collection. I'm just gonna pretend the name doesn't exist. But for a better named polish, we have Left Your Text on Red, which is described as a shimmery red. It's not wrong, but is it me or is OPI just getting a bit lazy with their descriptions? So this is another somewhat jelly kind of formula that's really sheer and juicy looking, and the shimmer looks to be a mix of pink and silver, but I think it mainly looks pink or red because of the base color. So this isn't exactly a true red shade. I would say there's a bit of orange in here. So again, it kind of makes me think of this as more of a summer color instead of spring. This one still had that squishy jelly finish even after 2 coats, where you can still make out my nail line pretty obviously, but if your nails are shorter, I don't think you would need a 3rd coat, but yeah, I did end up doing it for this one just because I didn't really love it that much. I think for this shade in particular with the finish, I just kind of like it a little bit more built up on 3 coats. And as you can see, it still doesn't cover my nail line 100%. So it is definitely very squishy looking, but I like it a lot better here on 3. Up next, we have Incognito Mode, which is a purple mauve cream. I do think this is a pretty shade, but there's something about this one that reminds me more of a fall color. I think if it was just a few shades lighter, it would work as a nice, dusty, kind of purpley spring shade. Which I know not everyone loves dusty as a description, but I just find those kind of shades so flattering, especially transitioning out of winter and into the brighter shades. The formula on this one was really nice. It was very creamy and even coverage, and I got it opaque on my nails in just 2 coats, so I doubt that you would need a 3rd unless your nails were a lot longer. Next up we have I Sold My Crypto, which is a shimmery violet polish. I actually kind of hate how the description of this one mentions that phrase, get rich quick, because when it comes to the crypto space, there are just so many scams out there since it's this unregulated industry. And I feel like crypto bros remind me of the girl bosses who try to recruit you to join their MLM. But rant aside, this polish is basically the purple version of Spring Break the Internet. It has a sheer jelly formula that's packed with this iridescent shimmer that I think is really pretty, but I found this one to actually be a lot more sheer than Spring Break the Internet. I needed 3 coats for this one as well, but it still wasn't 100% opaque. You could definitely see through to my nail line, so if you're not a fan of the jelly or squishy kind of shades, this probably wouldn't be for you, but I think it is really cute for the season. I especially love them going into summer, but yeah, I just can't get over the name behind this one. The next polish is Meta My Soulmate, which is described as a baby pink pearl. Here it is next to switch to portrait mode, which is the powder pink pearl. They're both very similar, but there's more of a peachy tone to portrait mode. So as far as Meta My Soulmate, it had basically the same formula where it was really sheer and brushstrokey on the first coat. You can definitely see through to my nail line, so it doesn't cover up much. And while I don't think having 2 light pink shades is necessary for the same collection, I can't help but kind of like both of them. Even though I don't especially love their pearl finish, there's just something about these shades that are so soft and delicate that I think are just really cute for the springtime. So I'm building this one up in 3 coats as well, and you can see it does build up really nicely, but you can definitely still see through to your nail line, so I wouldn't recommend this one if you're not a fan of that look. Next we have Data Peach, which is a pearly peach shade. And here it is next to Switch to Portrait Mode, which had that slightly peach tone to it, but you can see Data Peach is a lot darker. Thankfully, this is the last pearl finish, but honestly, this is one of my favorites, not just from the 3 pearls, but from the whole collection, which I don't know, is that crazy to say? I just adore peachy shades like this, especially for the spring. This one looks so pretty. It was still very bright, and that gold sheen in there is just, it just warms it up so much, and it just really reminds me of peaches. Even though this one was still pretty brushstrokey, I found that it was a lot more opaque than the previous 2 pearls, probably because the base is a little bit darker. So even though I could still see my nail line a little bit, it wasn't enough to do another coat. But here I did a sponged on layer just to kind of show you how to diffuse the brush strokes. It was a little sloppy, but I still liked it. And rounding out the collection, we have Clear Your Cache, which is a honeydew green cream. This is another one of my favorites from this collection. I just love greens like this for spring so much. They just remind me of new growth, and the slightly yellow tinge to it just brightens it up so much. This had another really smooth formula. It wasn't especially creamy like some of the other shades, but it was still perfectly opaque for me in just 2 coats. And I think it is picking up a little bit brighter here on camera, like it almost looks like a lime green. There is a bit of dustiness to it, so it seems more like a spring shade than a summer lime kind of green. Now moving on to comparisons, we're starting with a kick in the bud, and I have OPI's Madam President to compare it to, which is a iconic hot pink shade. And I also have Gigi from Zoya, which I think came out last year in their pink palette. So both of these seem pretty similar in the bottle, but on the nail, you can see that OPI's Madam President dries down a lot darker, so it definitely is much more of like a fall kind of hot pink. And Zoya's Gigi looks a little bit more on the coral side, and it's a little more opaque too. For Blinded by the Ringlight, I knew I wanted to see it next to Olive Ave's Sunshine from last spring, and I thought that they were going to be a lot more similar, but you can definitely see that they are not dupes. The OPI shade is a little bit more dusty, not as vibrant or opaque as the Olive Ave shade. For Switch to Portrait Mode, I have OPI's Cozumelted in the Sun, which I thought was going to be a lot similar, but it is definitely not a dupe. It's too dark and also just more shimmery. But I also have Olive Ave's Blossom from last spring, which is definitely a much closer comparison when it comes to that petal pink pearl kind of finish, but Olive Ave has a gold sheen and it's a little more opaque too. For Spring Break the Internet, I knew I had to compare this next to OPI's Pink, Bling, and Be Merry from their holiday collection last year. These are just super similar for back-to-back collections, but I also have it next to Olive Ave's Pixy, which came out in a summer collection a couple years ago, I think. And yeah, these also look very similar in the bottle. So on the nail, you can see that Pink, Bling, and Be Merry is a little bit more darker, maybe a little bit more purple leaning as well, and slightly more opaque. Olive Ave's Pixy is also a little bit more red, so none of these are dupes. So I mentioned that Silicon Valley Girl reminded me of a pumpkin orange, so I knew I needed to see it next to Holo Taco's Oh My Gourd from their Spooky Treats bundle last year. And on the nail, they are not dupes, maybe very similar. The main difference, I think, is with their formula, where the Holo Taco shade is a little bit more on the crully side, so you can still kind of see through to my nail line on the 2 coats here, where the OPI shade is fully opaque. But yeah, maybe the OPI shade isn't as much of a pumpkin orange as I thought. I think there's a little bit of warmth and dustiness to it. For Pink in Bio, I wanted to put it next to OPI's Alpine Snow, which is just a pure white polish just to kind of serve as a control, so you can see just how pink it is, even though it is very subtle. But for more color comparisons, I thought that Olive Ave's Peony would be similar as a very light kind of dusty baby pink, but Peony has a lot more peach to it. And so for more OPI shades, I have Let's Be Friends from the Hello Kitty collab, which looks pretty similar, but maybe not as pink. And then I also have OPI's Don't Bossa Nova Me Around, which is considered more of a nude kind of shade, but I think that it's very warm, and so it would look kind of similar to this. So comparing the OPIs on the nail, you can definitely see there is a pretty stark difference between all of them. Let's Be Friends looks very white compared to Pink in Bio, and then Don't Bossa Nova Me Around is a touch darker and a little bit more mauve-y looking. So I did end up applying a little bit of Alpine Snow just to show you how a stark white compares to all of these. Next up for NFTease Me, I have it compared to OPI's Gelato on My Mind, which is a very iconic bright blue sort of shade. So these definitely look very similar, but I also wanted to show it next to Olive Ave's Aster, which is a kind of robin's egg blue. It's a little bit more teal looking and not much of a true blue as OPI. So funny enough, I think Aster and Gelato on My Mind are much more similar, where NFTease Me is more of a true sky blue kind of shade. Next up for Left Your Text on Red, I wanted to see this next to OPI's Rhinestone Ready, which was also from their holiday collection last year. It's just another shimmery red polish. I also have Zoya's Sophia to compare it to because it's another juicy kind of bright red with a shimmer in there, though there's more of a prominent gold shimmer. So on the nail, you can see that they are definitely not dupes. If anything, Zoya's Sophia and Rhinestone Ready would be a little bit more comparable, but Left Your Text on Red is a lot brighter of an orangey cherry red and a lot more sheer too. For Incognito Mode, I wanted to show it next to Mooncat's A Doll's House, which is one of their newest creams that came out last month, and I thought that they were going to be more similar, but A Doll's House is a lot more pink leaning. So for a closer color comparison, I remembered LA Color's Dreamcatcher, which I really love this shade, but as you can see, it's not exactly a dupe either. If anything, the OPI shade matches the cap more than the actual polish. But yeah, on the nail, you can see that there is a pretty distinct difference where the LA Colors is a little bit more on the pinky side, but I think these are both really pretty. Next for I Meta My Soulmate, I just have a bottle comparison for OPI's Mary and Ice from their holiday collection last year. It's a very similar baby pink, but Mary and Ice is not a pearl finish. And we're actually bringing back OPI's Cozumelted in the Sun, this time to compare it to Data Peach because it's just a little bit of that darker peachy kind of color. But again, Cozumelted in the Sun is more of a shimmer than a pearl. So I also have Cirque's Fandango, which is one of my favorite Cirque polishes, and I really thought that these were going to be a lot more similar because they have that orange base with that gold shimmer, but the Cirque shade is a lot more of a sheer shimmer kind of shade and just not pearlescent the way that Data Peach is. And again, Cozumelted in the Sun is a little bit more pink leaning with more of a stronger shimmer, so no dupes here either. And lastly, for Clear Your Cache, I wanted to show this next to Olive Ave's Sprout from their spring collection last year because it's just another one of those dusty, springy greens. I would say that there's a little bit more white in Olive Ave though. And I also have Cirque's Tumbleweed, which I think they describe this as an avocado green, which I think is so funny, but it's also very accurate. So I thought that these looked really similar in the bottle, but on the nail, you can definitely still tell them apart. I would say that OPI's Clear Your Cache is definitely the brightest out of these and the most yellow leaning, but it's still very much green. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons for the Spring Me, Myself, and OPI collection. As always, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this release because as you kind of have heard throughout the video, I am not really into the whole crypto NFT industry. I just couldn't care less for it. So just ignoring the theme and just looking at this as a spring OPI release, it's still a little bit underwhelming to me. I mean, I am a fan of a lot of the colors. I mean, you know, I'm a seasonal wearer, so of course I'm gonna love some of these springy, dusty pastel shades for this time of year. But at the same time, half of the collection just doesn't really seem to fit in. It just doesn't really feel like cohesive to me. And I feel like that's kind of been the trend for OPI collections the last few months, at least in my opinion. So I'm curious to know what you think. Leave any and all thoughts that you have down below in the comments so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.